Well, this is America, and this is Birmingham, Alabama. Despite lying at the heart of a traditionally red state, the city itself is fairly split on the support for Donald Trump and his war with Iran. As the conflict now goes over the 2-month mark, questions are being raised about buying into Trump's narrative of success and whether it's benefiting the people here in America. I'll have more on that in a minute, but first let's go to Washington, D.C. and Cyril Vanier.
Richard Gaisford, thank you very much. 60 days. That is how long the U.S. president is authorized to wage war without the approval of Congress. In Donald Trump's conflict against Iran, that deadline is May 1st, so time's up. In theory, the U.S. president should go to Congress and get a green light if he wants to continue military action. In practice, presidents find a workaround, and this law does not actually stop the fighting. But it does force a moment of political reckoning. Why has the president committed the United States to a new war, and does it look like it's working out? Here's how Donald Trump has addressed that over the last 60 days.
A short time ago, the United States military began major combat operations in Iran. If we didn't hit within 2 weeks, they would have had a nuclear weapon. It will be leaving in pretty much the very near future. But right now, they've been decimated from every standpoint. Their Navy's gone, their Air Force is gone, their anti-aircraft is all gone, it's all gone, their radar is all gone. Their leaders are all gone. Never know with Iran because we negotiate with them and then we always have to blow them up. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong. We've totally defeated that country. 10 o'clock tomorrow, we have a blockade going into effect. That'll be 10 o'clock tomorrow. Other nations are working so that Iran will not be able to sell oil. Iran, you marking it down? Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. War in Iran is going along swimmingly. We can do whatever we want. Again, we have all the cards. They have no military left, practically. They have no leaders left. We don't know who the leaders are. Nobody knows who the leaders are. I don't think they know who the leaders are. They're not going to have a nuclear weapon. They know it, and just about everybody else does.
That was over the last 60 days. Here's what President Trump is saying now.
So they want to make a deal, but I'm not satisfied with it, so we'll see what happens. Do we want to go and just blast the hell out of him and finish him forever, or do we want to try and make a deal? I mean, those are the options.
Do you want to go blast the hell out of him?
I'd prefer not. On a human basis, I'd prefer not, but that's the option. Do we want to go in there heavy and just blast them away, or do we want to do something? They're a very disjointed unitship, as you can understand, Peter.
So on the 60-day mark, Al Jazeera's Rosalind Jordan takes stock not only of what the president has said publicly so far, but what he's done.
February 28th, the day the U.S. and Israel launched a war on Iran. It wasn't supposed to take long, and the government in Tehran was supposed to collapse.
You still expect up to 6 weeks total?
I don't know. I never reject time, whatever it takes.
Eventually, timelines changed.
Don't rush me, Jeff. Guys like you want to say, oh, so we were in Vietnam like for 18 years?
However, we are in a ceasefire right now, which our understanding means the 60-day clock pauses or stops in a ceasefire.
And so, too, did the reasons for going to war. No longer about ending Iran's nuclear weapons ambitions or its support for groups such as Hezbollah and the Houthis. Now, it's all about trying to break Tehran's closure of the Strait of Hormuz and repairing a damaged global economy. Soaring energy prices, disrupted shipping, consumers now coping with inflation. Another casualty, U.S.-NATO relations, because Europe won't join the fight in the Gulf.
Let's stand up and do what the Constitution requires us to do.
Trump never got congressional approval to start the war. Some Democrats reportedly are now considering a lawsuit to force him to end it. Meantime, the Islamic Republic still stands, despite losing many of its top leaders and much of its arsenal, and targeted by a U.S. naval blockade. Its leaders apparently are in no hurry to negotiate with Washington, which they accuse of bargaining in bad faith. According to the latest Reuters Ipsos poll, all this has caused the U.S. public to sour on the war. The percentage approving has risen from 27% at the start of the war to 34% now. But the percentage disapproving has soared from 43% to 61%. Just 25% think going to war was worth it, while 53% say no. And Trump's favorability rating down 2 points to 36%. President Donald Trump has said the war in Iran probably won't last as long as World War II. But after 60 days, it's not clear what Trump can do to wrap up a war he told Americans wouldn't take long to win. Rosalind Jordan, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Chief U.S. Correspondent Alan Fisher is at the White House, and Patty Culhane is on Capitol Hill. So, Alan, as far as Donald Trump is concerned, what is the way forward in Iran, or what's the way out?
Well, he has a number of options. First of all, he can accept the deal on the table, which he has already said is unacceptable, and he's already said he doesn't want a deal that is anything like the one that Barack Obama negotiated with the Iranians, the JCPOA. He said it must be much stronger and make sure Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon. He can continue the blockade, so-called Operation Economic Fury, and hope that the Iranians get back to the negotiating table and give him exactly what he wants, because he's going to try and bleed their economy. He could resume the war. Now, that would accept the damage that is being done to the United States economy. But he's already said he could blast the hell out of them. Those were the words he used. And then he would have to set an end to it, because remember, this was the president that was elected on the fact that he wasn't going to get involved in what he called stupid foreign wars, and now he finds himself fighting in the Middle East. Or he could declare victory. We've been hearing about it for the last 5 weeks, how Iran is devastated, how it has no navy, no air force, no ability to defend itself. So just declare war and try and move on. And then there is the option that he doesn't do any of these things. What he does is leave the ceasefire in place, leaves the military where it is at the moment, and continue to monitor what the Iranians are doing. And if there is anything that he perceives as a threat to the United States, or perhaps to their Gulf neighbours, then take further military action then. He has all these options open to him. For the moment the ceasefire holds, he says there's no real prospect of negotiations. There's nothing there that he can deal with at the moment. But everything is really in the gift of Donald Trump. He will make the decision based on advice from his advisors, but he will make the decision about where we're headed next.
Chief U.S. Correspondent Alan Fisher, thank you very much, Alan. As we mentioned, Congress is supposed to approve military action, but so far that hasn't happened. Since the U.S. started attacking Iran in late February, there have been 8 votes in Congress on the War Powers Resolution. That's the resolution, as we explained, to block the president's authority to wage war without their approval, without formal approval. There have been 6 votes in the Senate, 2 in the House. All of them have failed, which means that Congress so far has not voted to tie the president's hands. Here's what's interesting. Thursday's vote in the Senate saw a Republican change their position for the first time. Susan Collins, who is in a tight race for re-election in the upcoming midterms, broke ranks by supporting that resolution. She says she will not support extending hostilities beyond the 60-day deadline until the White House lays out clear and achievable goals for bringing the conflict to a close. But President Trump, like several other presidents before him, it has to be said, takes the view that the War Powers Resolution is unconstitutional in the first place because he is the commander-in-chief of the U.S. military.
It's never been sought before. There's been many times, and nobody's ever gotten it before. They consider it totally unconstitutional. But we're always in touch with Congress. But nobody's ever sought it before. Nobody's ever asked for it before. It's never been used before. Why should we be different?
Patty Culhane is on Capitol Hill. Patty, Democrats are against this war, we know that, but they don't control Congress. Republicans do. How much of a runway are Republicans going to give Trump to continue this war?
Well, it really depends. I know that sounds like a bit of a flip-flop answer, but you're right. Republicans have control of Congress. They control the House on this side. They control the Senate on that side. This at the same, and throughout his term, they have gone along with every single thing that the president has asked of them, except for one thing, the release of the Epstein files. They did go against him on that. Still, offices here on Capitol Hill are being flooded with calls from angry voters because this is really hurting Americans in their pocketbook. And that said, The House, all of the members of the House are up for re-election in November. Third of the Senate is up for re-election. And just, again, I know we've talked about this poll, but it's really striking. The Iran war is as unpopular as the Iraq war was at the height of violence in 2006 and the Vietnam War in the early 70s. So you might be thinking, well, that might move Republicans. Well, as I mentioned, they're up for their primaries now. They need to get their party's nomination to be able to run for re-election in November. That's happening now. So what number matters most from that poll? 79%. That's the number of Republicans who said that it was the right decision to launch the war in Iran. As long as that number continues to stay high, it's unlikely any members of Congress, Republican members of Congress, are going to be willing to buck the president.
Al Jazeera's Patty Culhane on Capitol Hill. Thank you very much, Patty. And how is the price of war playing out in solidly red states like Alabama, for instance? Is there any sign of the Republican faithful there becoming disenchanted? One group in Birmingham is making a crowdfunding effort to push the anti-Trump, anti-war point home. Richard Gaisford reports.
In a city divided by railway tracks, two very different opinions on the conflict from both sides of the political front line. Joellen's angry at the price of the war and the effect on cost of living. With crowdfunding, she's paid for a billboard in Birmingham featuring Donald Trump and Alabama's two Republican senators who support him.
The whole thought behind the billboards is to get facts and information and, yeah, a few digs, because that's who we are.
But Philip Brown disagrees. He's chair of Republicans in Birmingham, a leading black Trump supporter in the red state of Alabama.
How about the Ukraine war? Let's use Biden's terminology for the Ukraine war, as long as it takes.
Joellen hopes her billboards will cut through to moderate Republicans.
One of the things they said was that we're trying to help the people who are against this regime. So we start off bombing a school of 160 some odd girls and their teachers out of the chute, and then say we didn't do it.
I work with a congregation that is predominantly black and probably mostly Democrat. I live in a neighborhood that is the same. My wife is Democrat. There's a lot of times you feel alone.
So finding agreement here unlikely. The war fueling debate with no sign of an end to the Middle East conflict coming down the tracks. Richard Gaisford, Al Jazeera, Birmingham, Alabama.
Joining us now in the studio, David Sedney, former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, Douglas Silliman, former U.S. Ambassador to Kuwait and Iraq. Thank you very much, gentlemen, to both of you for being in the studio with us. Since we have reached the 60-day mark, the spirit of the War Powers Resolution passed in the early 70s is that the collective judgment of the President and the Congress should come into play when it's about a decision to enter war or to continue a war. Do you think that the President, Mr. Sedney, should seek approval from Congress at this point to continue his war against Iran?
Well, I personally think he should. I think it's also clear that he won't.
Ambassador?
I agree with that. To my reading of the law, from 60 days when a conflict involving U.S. forces starts, a president must go to the Congress to continue. The problem is it's never really been fully implemented, and as you have heard in your early report, the administration is redefining the timeline of the war to say that they don't have to do this, but even if they did have to do it, they've not yet reached their 60 days. So I think they will continue to find excuses. I'm being a little more impolite, perhaps, than Mr. Sedney is. They will continue to find excuses not to approach Congress until they absolutely have to.
Well, so the U.S. Secretary of Defense has said we're not at war right now because there's been a ceasefire in effect since April 7th. So really the clock, as far as he's concerned, that's his explanation, the clock stopped counting on April 7th. Therefore, they haven't hit the 60-day mark. Do you agree with the actual logic behind that?
I personally don't agree with it. But again, what I personally think doesn't matter, and actually what any politician thinks doesn't matter, what really matters is the amount of support that the president can muster in Congress. And right now, the president doesn't think he has enough support to have that vote. Because if he thought he had that support, he would go ahead and allow the vote to happen. Because in the past, when presidents have needed support from the American people for armed efforts, they have sought that kind of such as in 2001 when we took action against Afghanistan. So this is a situation where President Trump is treading a very careful line. He's not going to go to Congress and ask unless he's sure he can win, and the likelihood of winning is at best 50-50.
Douglas Silliman, do you agree that if President Trump were to ask Congress's approval to continue this war, he might not get it?
Honestly, I don't think that that actually matters at the moment. I think it is more a matter of the president doesn't want to be seen as asking for permission for doing something that he believes he can do on his own authority. You heard the statements that he made while leaving the White House. He changed history a little bit, but nonetheless, I believe he thinks that as commander-in-chief, this entire law and the concept that he must go to the Congress is unconstitutional. I think members of Congress, even on the Republican side, would disagree. But again, this comes down to whether or not the president thinks that this is a win for him or if this is something that he might not completely win.
So I want to bring our viewers the latest poll numbers on the popularity versus unpopularity of this war. As our correspondent Patty Culhane mentioned a little earlier in the program, a poll from the Washington Post, ABC, and Ipsos shows just how unpopular the war with Iran has become. Overall, here's the big takeaway. 61% of respondents say that military action against Iran was a mistake. 61%. Only 19% say that U.S. actions have been successful, and the rest are split between those who think the U.S. has been unsuccessful so far and those who feel it's just too early to tell. Meanwhile, only 22% think that the president's actions are consistent with his campaign promises not to involve the U.S. in new wars abroad. Right now, the Iran war is as unpopular as the Iraq war in 2006 and the Vietnam War in the early 1970s. David Sedney, when you hear that, Iran war as unpopular as the Iraq war and the Vietnam war, widely considered debacles in U.S. foreign policy, does that give you pause?
Well, it not only gives me pause, but it gives the Republican Party and President Trump pause. Because the big issue here is really not what Congress does or the votes you're talking about, is what's going to happen in the midterms. Right now, President Trump has a Republican majority that he controls in both the House and the Senate. If he loses either one or both of those in November, as now seems likely, then his ability to do anything on his agenda, whether it's foreign policy or domestic policy, will be severely limited. So President Trump is balancing right now between achieving what he wants. As Ambassador Sullivan just said, he wants this war to continue. He wants this war to be won, but also the prospect that he might be so hamstrung in the last 2 years of his reign that he would not be able to achieve anything and might well face impeachment.
Since you mentioned the midterms and how that could potentially hamstring the president's ability to conduct even foreign policy, if we were 6 months from now in a scenario in the Iran war similar to where we are now, and that's only one scenario among many others, one hypothesis, I recognize that, but if we were kind of where we are now in November, do you think, and the Democrats won the midterms, what would change as far as the Iran war?
Well, I think the Democrats, if they had control of both the House and the Senate, they would be able to choke off the funding for the war and thereby bring it to an end.
Ambassador, does that mean Donald Trump needs to have this wrapped up one way or another before the midterms?
Well, I think Donald Trump wants to have this wrapped up and be able to declare victory and walk away from the war well before the midterms, because what is likely to happen, given the continued Strait of Hormuz closure, the likely increase in oil prices steadily until not only the strait is reopened, but until the international oil markets return to normal, is that the price of gasoline for Americans, the price of fertilizer for farmers, the price of life for Americans will continue to increase slowly. And what is interesting is the United States is probably the country that is least economically affected by this war in the entire world, because we have such a large economy and can provide a large chunk of our own energy. President Trump, if he can wrap up the war and declare victory several months before November, he may be able to pull out victories in the midterms for Republicans. The longer that the price of gasoline continues to prop up, the longer that the price of commodities grown in the United States goes up because of rising costs for production and shipping, the more likely is that Republicans will lose more seats in November. So he'd like to wrap this up quickly and be able to declare victory.
60 days into this war with Iran, I'd like your assessment of how the U.S. is doing so far. And I'm just going to lay it out briefly. Some of the things that Donald Trump has framed as victories in the Iran war. Here they are. The president says that the U.S. has achieved regime change in Iran because joint U.S.-Israeli attacks have killed many senior officials, starting with the late Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Trump says that Iran's navy has been totally destroyed, but he also stated that Iran was still firing on ships in the Strait of Hormuz just recently. The president insisted that the U.S. had total control of the skies over Iran, but last month, Tehran shot down an American jet, forcing a rescue mission, and another jet was damaged so badly that the pilots had to eject before allowing their plane to crash. Trump also says that fuel prices, you just heard about that, fuel prices will fall quickly when the fighting stops and the Strait of Hormuz reopens. But his own energy secretary warned recently that gas prices may not come back down to pre-war levels until next year. So, David Sedney, right now, 60 days in, what is your assessment of how this war has been prosecuted and how close it is to reaching the goals stated by this administration?
Well, as you've laid out, really across the board, those goals have really not been achieved. In terms of regime change, there's no regime change in Iran. It's still the same regime, and many analysts say it's a more hardline, more anti-U.S. Regime than there was before the killing of the former senior leader. Secondly, on their military capabilities, while President Trump has claimed they've been entirely decimated, obliterated, etc., in fact, Iran was continuing to be able to fire drones and ballistic missiles up until the ceasefire, and in the time since the ceasefire was put in place, is undoubtedly building its capabilities up even more. It's also not to even look at the possible assistance that Iran may be getting from Russia and China, who have a vested interest in prolonging the war and humiliating the United States. And then finally, on the issue of gas prices, given the shut-ins of oil in the Gulf, the disruption to the transportation networks, according to oil analysts, there's no way oil prices will go down to anywhere near what they were before the war in the next 6 months. So I would say across the board, President Trump has lost the facts. The problem for American people is President Trump doesn't need to have the facts. He has been able to pull the wool over the eyes of the American people on many issues. So as Ambassador Sullivan just said, he may declare a victory even if he's lost. And then it becomes a matter of who controls the information to the American people. Do the American people believe what's actually happening, or do they believe what President Trump, the ultimate salesman, is going to try and tell them?
Ambassador Silliman, do you agree? I mean, the general assessment here from David Sedney is that the U.S. currently not winning the war, not checking its own boxes, not achieving what it set out to do. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think the problem from the very beginning is that there was not a clear strategic goal. The president has laid out, in addition to the ones that you just named, getting rid of all Iranian ballistic missiles and drones, stopping support for Iranian proxy forces, providing retribution for the thousands of Iranians who were killed by security forces during the demonstrations in Iran earlier this year. What is the actual goal? What I think is probably this biggest strategic loss in this entire war is that the Strait of Hormuz is now closed, causing economic repercussions around the world. This does not appear to have even been in the calculations of the administration, but it is now the #1 goal that they are trying to accomplish. So not only have they not completely achieved any of the goals that they've laid out publicly, another goal has been added on top of that, and the Iranians have essentially told the United States, this is going to be the goal you're going to work on, to open the Strait of Hormuz. So I think that strategically, we have gone backwards a step and have made marginal progress on the other ones. I think for the president, if he can get a deal with Tehran, which he can say is better than the deal that Barack Obama got in the JCPOA in 2015, he can self-assuredly walk away from this, declare victory, and move on to whatever is going to be next. Short of that, I think he's going to be in this for a much longer time.
Dave, no, you disagree, David Sedney?
I don't think the JCPOA and that kind of what for many Americans is irrelevant verbiage is important. What is really important to Americans is the price of gasoline. And if that price of gasoline stays high, as analysts that I have been talking with believe it will happen regardless of when the Strait of Hormuz reopens, President Trump's going to lose the midterms. I think the odds on the prediction sites right now are increasingly in favor of that happening. And I think the chances of President Trump successfully pulling off a claim of victory when actually he has lost are diminishingly small.
But you say that the Iran nuclear deal, the one signed by Obama more than 10 years ago, is probably not relevant to Americans today. But do you agree or disagree with the prevailing view that it is relevant to Trump in the sense that it is a benchmark and he wants to do no worse than that and preferably better than that if he were to make a deal with Iran?
Well, it's relevant to him, but it's also, I think, of even more importance, it's relevant to the Israelis and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who I think in many ways is Trump's biggest audience here. As long as Netanyahu thinks that Trump has done better than Obama, Trump will be able to try and sell the deal. But it's something that's, I think, not well recognized, the influence that Prime Minister Netanyahu personally has had on President Trump's evaluation of what should be the objectives in this war.
Yeah, we're at the 60-day mark. That forces, as we said at the top of the show, a political reckoning. It certainly raises the question of whether the war is going in the U.S.'s favor. For the moment, the momentum of this does not seem to be going in the administration's favor, but they keep arguing that give them more time and they can get to either a deal or maybe a military victory. Donald Trump saying that again just a few hours ago. That's where we are now. We're going to leave it at that for now, but I want to thank our guests. David Sedney, former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. Douglas Silliman, former U.S. Ambassador to Kuwait and Iraq. Thank you very much to both of you.
Thank you very much.
And the American public was told that the war would last weeks, not months. And now, 2 months in, social media users are voicing their impatience. Here's Heidi Jo Castro.
The clock is ticking on what was formerly the Trump Hotel in Washington. The president sold this hotel when he was out of office, but its iconic clock tower continues to mark time as the war with Iran drags on. Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren pointed out the costs as these hours pass, writing on X, 13 Americans have been killed and hundreds more are injured. We're spending $1 billion in taxpayer funds a day. Gas is more than $4 per gallon. This is the cost of Trump's war. Republican Senator Susan Collins emphasized the War Powers Act and its clear 60-day deadline for Congress to either authorize or end U.S. involvement in foreign hostilities. That deadline is not a suggestion, it is a requirement, she writes. And what about regular Americans? The war is unpopular, as we've told you, and on social media, many say it's also boring. People are already stopped talking about it. Another forever war loading. We were told weeks, not months, and too many wars that don't affect people severely news are making the general public exhausted. So a collective shoulder shrug when it comes to the future of Iran, but concern about high gas prices at home. That is where Americans stand 60 days in.
Heidi Jo Castro, thank you very much. That's all from the team here in Washington. We'll hand back to Al Jazeera's global headquarters in Doha. First, though, back to Richard Gaisford. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Cyril. Don't forget, wherever you are in the world, you can always watch the latest edition of This is America, Monday to Fridays, 18:30 GMT. That is 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time here in the United States. But from here in Birmingham, Alabama, it is goodbye for now.